everybody goes through hard times in their marriage, and how God can use that. And in the healing process of that marriage, of that brokenness, our marriage can be made stronger.
Hey, I'm Rusty.
And I'm Heather.
And we're the Bryants, and this is the Redeemed Marriage Podcast.
We are here to encourage healthy marriages, strengthen wounded marriages, and begin the process of restoration to broken marriages.
We aren't licensed counselors, but we are a redeemed couple that loves the Lord and wants to help you journey through this messy, challenging, and fun part of life called marriage. We're back with another episode of the Redeemed Marriage Podcast. This is Rusty and Heather Bryant coming to you all the way from Clinton, Mississippi.
Yes, and on Mother's Day.
It is Mother's Day.
If you're listening. Oh, then nobody's going to listen today because it's Mother's Day weekend.
I feel weird when we relate it to like a certain time or a day because, people listen to these things.
Sure.
We'll get new listeners 6 months from now, and they're going to go back and be like, hey, Mother's Day.
Yeah, it doesn't matter. I listened to a sermon not too long ago, like literally a few weeks ago. It was a Christmas sermon. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, happy Mother's Day to all you mothers. And you may be listening to this next year on Mother's Day, actual Mother's Day. But happy Mother's Day to you.
Thank you.
Because you are the mother of my children.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you.
So, go. You're in charge of this.
I am in charge of this. So it is very rare. If you've listened to us for a while, you know it is very rare that I come up with what we're talking about. Rusty's amazing at kind of outlining and saying, let's hit these points, and then we just kind of talk. Well, just if you listened last week, you know that we had an eventful Sunday last week. We always record these on Sunday nights, and last week we were in Destin, and just to very briefly recap, we were at an 8 o'clock game for our 15-year-old, and about 10-15 minutes in, while we were in Destin, he fell, broke his collarbone, and we knew immediately he was broken. We took off to the ER. They said he needed surgery, but we had to come back to Jackson to do that. They weren't going to do it there anyway, so we drive all the way back to Jackson, which is how far? 5 hours. And every bump he felt, so that was miserable. Got back, was going to see the orthopedic doctor on Tuesday, with the intention of having surgery on Wednesday. Well, we went to the doctor Tuesday, and he was like, we're doing this thing today. So praise the Lord. Tuesday afternoon, Logan had surgery. They put in a plate and some screws, and he is feeling much, much better. Well, we were just kind of discussing that this week, and with him, just trying to get his heart okay with an injury, and what God might be up to, and how he might use it in his life. And then also just preparing him for the next few months of being off from playing things that playing soccer and running, which he really, really enjoys. And we were just kind of talking through all that, and it came to my mind, and this is not going to be a surprise to anybody listening, because everybody has heard that once you break a bone, that it grows back. When it fuses back, it's even stronger than it was before. Well, obviously, his collarbone is going to be stronger than it was before, because it has a plate and several screws in it that are keeping it secure. And of course, the bone will reform and it will be stronger. And we started talking about how that has been the picture of our marriage specifically. And then I know so many marriages that are out there because we've heard from them. We've heard from listeners who have been through a break in their marriage, have been through a hard, a brokenness in their marriage, and it doesn't have to be our story. It can be something different. We've talked about infidelity, of course, or the loss of a child, or, you're so good at making it relevant to everybody, but everybody goes through hard times in their marriage, and how God can use that. and in the healing process of that marriage, of that brokenness, forgive me, our marriage can be made stronger and than it was before. And we have talked and even had some controversy around that subject, that some listeners did not think that that's possible, that our marriage could be stronger now than it was before the brokenness happened. And so, of course we were like, oh, that's a beautiful example of what our marriage has been, because we've just walked through that with our son, and it was just a sweet reminder. Well, in that, we're just kind of revisiting and re-talking about injuries that we've had, that our oldest son Luke has had, and what God's done through that. And we were just joking around about, I broke my arm when I was young, and I was telling the story around that. And gosh, Rusty, it just reminded me of a beautiful example of that you've told before. And I said, you have got to share that story with our listeners, because yes, it's a powerful image of a broken bone becoming stronger. But one of your stories of injury is just an amazing picture that I think applies to every single listener that we have.
Well, you teed me up.
Yeah, see what you did there.
That's funny, because that's the story I'm going to tell, is about T-ball. Okay, so this has been one of my go-to stories for a long, long time.
But none of our listeners have heard it.
Probably not. But yeah, you asked me today to share the story. I was like, oh my gosh, it's been a minute since I've thought about this. But I remember when I was a little kid, probably, 5, 6, 7, I don't know, somewhere around in there. And, back in the day, we actually used to play outside. Yeah, that's kind of a different thing from the generation that goes on now. But we had lots of neighborhood games, and there was this big field across the street from my house, and we would go over there and we would play soccer and baseball and football and all kinds of stuff. And, kind of reminds you of the movie Sandlot a little bit. But one year for my birthday, I had gotten a T-ball stand. And so I guess I was just getting into T-ball. And so my parents gave me this T-ball stand. And the first thing I did was go walk around the neighborhood and try to find all my neighborhood friends to play T-ball. I didn't go ask you. You were a neighborhood friend, kind of, but I didn't ask you to play. But my neighbor across the street, he was able to, of course, he was excited and wanted to come play, but nobody else would play. We couldn't find anybody. So it was just the two of us. So we went to play a little one-on-one T-ball, which, that's interesting in itself. And so basically, we had the bases set up. We had the T-ball stand set up, and we were just smashing the baseball. And so we would smash the baseball and run around the bases, and while the person was running around the bases, the other one would run and go get the ball and try to get back before they touched home plate or whatever. So something like that. And the friend that I was playing with was just bigger than me, and so he was I've always been a small guy, but he was smashing the ball, and I wasn't even getting a chance to play on my own T-ball stand. He was smashing the ball, and my little legs just kept running after the ball, and he was running around the bases over and over again, and I just kept chasing the balls and trying to run back, and I never could catch him and get back in time. I was so incredibly frustrated with the whole thing. And then he kind of started, dancing around, making fun of me a little bit as he was going around the bases. And so he steps up to hit it again. And, I'm just so frustrated at this point. He smashes a ball, and I'm like, well, here I go again. And he's kind of laughing as he runs to first base. And I had my hat on and didn't really know how to express my frustration as a young child at the time, so I just grabbed my hat and I just threw it on the ground, and I was like, I refuse to go and chase another baseball. And I was bending down to pick up my hat as he's running around, he's rounding first and going to second, And I look down at my hat, and there's another baseball that's just sitting right beside my hat. So I reach down, real sneaky, and just in kind of one motion, I put the baseball inside the hat as I'm picking up the hat. And so as he's rounding second, he goes to third, and as he's rounding third going to home, I was like, this is my chance. And so I reared back with that hat, and as hard as I could, the ball was inside the hat, and I threw the hat, and it was probably the best throw of my life. And I nailed him right in the face, and he dropped. It was incredible. And so he dropped to the ground. He's wallering on the ground, and I'm thinking, what a shot,
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, I'm thinking, oh, my gosh, I might have killed my friend. And then I'm thinking, I'm about to be in some serious trouble. And so he jumps up and he runs home. And so the whole time, I'm sitting here going, what am I going to do? I'm fixing to get in some big-time trouble. I mean, first of all, it might be really, really hurt. And then I'm like, well, I got to come up with a story. And so, in my, little small mind and, being a kid, I'm like, okay, well, this is pretty easy to get out of. I'm just going to say I threw my hat at him and had no idea there was a baseball in it. And everybody's going to believe that. Yep. So I go and I'm like, I got to go, check on him. So I go across the street, knock on the door. And, of course, his mom comes to the door, and I'm like, oh, my goodness. And I held my head in shame. I was very I was scared. I was disappointed in myself, but I was like, trying to get the story straight in my mind, all that kind of stuff. And so I'm just like looking down at my feet, and I'm like, oh, and I asked for my friend if he's there, and so she doesn't really say anything. The mom doesn't say anything. She just kind of goes back to the back, and I'm like, well, she's going to get him. And so I hear the footsteps coming, and so I'm like, well, I gotta confront and face this. And so I lift up my head, and oh my gosh, when I saw him for the first time, it literally looked like a baseball was growing out of his eye. So I had to hit him right in the eye. And if you've ever been hit with a baseball, it swells up, obviously, got a big old bruise, kind of black and blue. But the coolest thing was you could literally see the seams of the baseball on his face. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is really cool. But, I apologized. I kind of fed them the bull story about and I don't know, I'm sure they didn't take it, but whatever, everything was fine. But I just, the whole story, the coolest thing was how his head looked, and the baseball looked like it was literally growing out of his face. And, I thought about that a lot afterwards, because the next day when he went to school, nobody really had to ask him, like, what happened to you? Like, it was kind of like you would walk up to him and be like, oh, dude, you got hit with a baseball. Mm-hmm. Like, it was very obvious because you could see it. It was coming out of him, and you could see the seams. And that story just always stuck with me. And I know that you wanted to tie it in with what you're wanting to talk about, and that's why you asked me to share the story. Mm-hmm. So there's the story. That's the famous story. And there I have teed it up for you now. I've teed it back up for you.
Well, every time I think about that story and hear you tell that story, and of course the reason why I wanted you to say it is because for me it is just a beautiful picture and such a sweet reminder of what we should look like when other people look at us. When you looked at your friend and people at school looked at him and you said there was no doubt, it's not like they said, dude, did a basketball hit you or a football? It was obviously a baseball because of the seams and it was obvious. And I think, and I pray and I cry out to God all the time on our behalf and on the behalf of our listeners who are going through marriage renewal is that when people look at us, when they look at our story, when they pass by, when they hear our voice, that there's no question that we're in love with Jesus. And I think that is just my prayer for us today. Of course, with it being Mother's Day, probably not Mother's Day when you're listening, but with it being Mother's Day, it's been on my heart a lot. Just my children see Christ in me. In our marriage, that, something silly happened today in our marriage, and Logan was like, "Oh my gosh, y'all are just so weird." Of course it was, PDA, it was getting on his nerves because we were being affectionate towards each other. And I just think, but in that, as much as we were laughing about it and joking, he knows that we love each other. And I hope that he sees Christ's love, through us and through our marriage. And there's so much hurt out there. There are listeners that we're listening to that are thinking, I'm in that broken bone phase. We're in the brokenness part. We are hurting. But then there's people, we communicated with a couple this week that God has just restored in such a powerful way. And she was saying how she could just see a difference in her husband, that he used to be so hardened and now he's just so tender towards the Lord, and his heart is just such a heart that is not a heart of stone anymore, but a heart that God has just softened. And when people see him, even if nobody else, which I do not think this is the case, but even if nobody else in his circle or in his community of people or in his family sees Christ in him, his wife does. And that's huge. She can look at him and know that he has been touched by Jesus and that his heart is not hard anymore. And so that's just was my challenge for this week, is for people to look at your marriage, whether you've been through a brokenness or not. Do people look at your marriage and see Jesus when they look at you, at your spouse, at how y'all walk out marriage together? Is it something that is obvious? People don't have to wonder what it is that's different about you, that they know that it's Jesus.
Going back to just what you were talking about when we first started, the injury we've gone through. Good grief, we've gone through so many injuries. Both of our boys play sports. We both grew up playing sports. We've had surgeries. You've had a gazillion surgeries because you went through cancer. And, it's, I think it's very safe to say that you can look at every one of our injuries, every one of our surgeries, and all of us, all four of us, have come back stronger, particularly in the area that was injured. It just comes back stronger. It takes time. Sure. It takes a lot of time in some cases, but it takes time. But we've come back stronger. But so much of that has just been kind of our mentality. Because a lot of people don't do that. They get injured and they just kind of, well, that's it, and just kind of, that's, I'll get it back to where it's functioning and I can manage and I can deal with it. But, I'm not really that interested in coming back stronger. And I just think that for all four of us and the things that we've been through in our life, we've just always come back so much stronger. Even on the ride home a while ago, Logan said something about not missing soccer practice. He's 4 days out of surgery or something. He's like, well, I'm going to go to soccer. Obviously, he's not going to play. But he's like, because that's just how I was raised, that's how y'all, and like, I think about that, just how we, every, hard thing that's come along our way, we've fought through it. So I say all that because there's a lot of marriages, like you said, out there that are injured right now. They're injured, they're broken, just like a broken bone. And this is the opportunity to allow God to do surgery. And surgery, while it is scary, sure. There's risks involved in surgery. And when your marriage gets injured, there's some tough stuff you're going to have to walk through. But if you allow God to do the surgery on your marriage, it's going to come back stronger. And you started off by talking about just how when you have a broken bone and it grows back stronger. And like sometimes God just needs to, we just need to allow God to have that opportunity to break us, to mold us, and then to do the surgery to where we come back even stronger. And so I say all that because the people that are out there and they just, we've talked to people even this week that, the stuff that they're going through, like it seems so incredibly hopeless when you're going through it. But if you allow God to start doing that work, then you can come back stronger, and you can come back to where you can be that picture like you're talking about, that picture that people need to see of, man, Jesus can work miracles, and Jesus can do things that can grow us and make us stronger and make our marriage stronger. So I think it's a great word. Just, the stuff that we have dealt with, and I know a lot of times we do come on here and we share from personal things and our heart and things that are going on like right now. But I think that there's people out there that deal with the same stuff, and they just need to hear it and hear it from us as a word of encouragement. So you have the last word. You were the one that chose this this topic. So
you always wrap up so beautifully. Well, I would just say as a wrap up, just as you go this week, what is an area that you can allow? How can you allow God to break you if you need to be molded into something new? How can you look at the life that you are leading and as you walk with your spouse in marriage and say, how is our life going in a way that people can see Jesus? Is there something about us that's different? Are we honoring Christ in our marriage? And just be encouraged that he wants to use us. He wants to, our pastor talked a couple of weeks ago about how we are his plan A, like we are who he wants to use to show others Jesus. And are we doing that well?
So I actually, just in thinking through that, this will be the kind of the wrap up, but I do actually have just a challenge. Like I would say, if you're listening to this and you just, you're like, what do I do with this? What do I do with these words? Okay. Thanks for the encouragement. But what I would say is just this week, as you're listening to this, just choose one thing in your marriage. Like just pick out one thing that you feel like, man, I need to let God do some surgery in that one area. And it could be anything. It could be the words, your tone of voice, the things that you say to your spouse. Are you building your spouse up? Do you tear your spouse down? Are you being lazy? Are you not helping? Are you not being a companion? Whatever it is that, for you, there's something that you need to just say, God, I need you to do some surgery in that area because it needs to grow back stronger. Because I'm falling short in this area, or our marriage together, we're falling short in this area. And so that would be my challenge, is just to identify one thing this week and just say, God, I'm turning it over to you. I'm letting you do the surgery. If we all did that, like one thing a week, boy, wouldn't our marriages be so much better? Yeah. But thank you for leading us in that word today. Sure. And we'll see you guys next time. Want to remind you, if you haven't already, make sure you follow our podcast on whatever platform you listen to, and leave us a honest rating and review, because it really does help us out. Check out our website when you get a chance. Sign up for our email list. We got a lot of cool things that we like to offer through that. So until next time, thanks for listening. We'll see you.